Welcome everyone. Today we're embarking on a fascinating journey to uncover a crucial yet often overlooked chapter in American history, the pivotal role of Spain in the American Revolution. Now, when we think about the American Revolution, our minds often go straight to figures like George Washington or events like the Boston Tea Party, for example. But what if I told you that there was another major global power that played a decisive behind-the-scenes role in securing American independence? For too long, the contributions of Hispanic peoples and nations, particularly Spain, have been marginalized or entirely absent from mainstream narratives of U.S. history. So our goal today is to shed light on this hidden heritage to ensure that these vital stories are finally recognized.
To understand Spain's involvement, we must challenge some common assumptions about early American history. Spain had a massive presence across vast swaths of what would become the United States, long before Jamestown or Plymouth were established. Influential figures like Juan Ponce de Leon and Orlando de Soto explored and settled in regions centuries before English established Plymouth or Jamestown. Spanish mission and military outposts known as presidios were among the earliest permanent European settlements on U.S. soil, and places now known as Florida, Texas, California, and Virginia. So, why is this history so hidden? The Americans' historical narrative deliberately demonized Spanish influence to justify Anglo-American dominance. It essentially distorted history to push a particular agenda, leading to a profound lack of understanding about Spain's extensive pre-revolutionary role and its motivation for intervention. The work of people like Miguel Perez, a Cuban referee who came to the U.S. at age 11 and has dedicated his platform to hidden Hispanic heritage to illuminate the overlooked history of Hispanic people in the United States.
Greetings, I'm Linda Caldwell Epps, born and raised in Elizabeth, New Jersey, and a student and teacher of American history and culture. I work with all populations concerning New Jersey history in particular, but history of the United States as a whole. And very happy to join you today for a conversation about the Spanish influence or the Spanish participation in the American Revolutionary War.
Good afternoon. My name is Miguel Socarras. I wasn't born in Elizabeth, but I have lived in Elizabeth most of my life. I am an enthusiast of history, probably because of my experience as an immigrant and exile in another culture, trying to understand the reasons why make me interested in the history of the United States and also the history of the relationship with the United States with specifically Cuba, which is my country of birth, and the rest of Latin America. I think that this is a wonderful step towards completing the history of this continent as a whole, and congratulations on that.
Before we dive into the American Revolution itself, it's important to understand the sheer scale of Spain's global empire and its influence across the Americas, an influence that often predates British colonization. We often learn about the 13 colonies, but envision a much larger, interconnected network of Spanish territories. In North America, this included vast areas from Florida, stretching through the Gulf Coast across Texas, New Mexico, and Arizona, and up the entire Pacific coast into California. These weren't just uninhabited lands. Spain established complex societies including cities, universities, sophisticated trade routes. Places like St. Augustine, Florida, founded in 1565, made it the oldest continuously inhabited European established settlement in the United States, predating Jamestown by over 40 years. But Spain's reach extended far beyond what would become the U.S. Its vast empire encompassed most of South America, Central America, Mexico, and major islands in the Caribbean. This global presence meant Spain was a dominant force, deeply intertwined with economies and politics of the entire Western Hemisphere. This extensive footprint meant that when the American Revolution broke out, Spain was not some distant, disconnected power. It was a major player with significant interests, territories, and a military presence bordering the British colonies, and controlling vital trade routes. Spain's decisions would have far-reaching consequences not just for the British and the Americans, but for its own vast colonial holdings as well. Understanding this broader Spanish influence is key to appreciating why their involvement in distant colonial uprisings in North America was a calculated, strategic move within a much larger geopolitical chess game. Thank you.
Now let's get to the heart of why Spain, a major global power with its own vast colonial empire, would get involved in the American colonies' fight for independence against Great Britain. Firstly, it's crucial to understand the long-standing rivalry between Spain and Great Britain. These two nations have been geopolitical adversaries for centuries, and this rivalry intensified after the 7 Years' War, where Spain lost Florida to Britain. So, the American Revolution presented a clear and strategic opportunity for Spain, which is to weaken its formidable opponent and potentially regain lost territories. The Museum of the American Revolution emphasizes that these Spain involvement stem from the strategic motivations. Secondly, we need to consider the Bourbon Family Compact. This was a formal alliance between Spain and France when France decided to support the American colonies against Britain. Spain was naturally drawn into the conflict. Essentially, Spain saw a chance to tip the scales in a global power struggle, reclaim lost land, and support its ally, all while weakening a common enemy. It wasn't purely altruistic support for American independence, but a calculated geopolitical move that ultimately benefited the American cause immensely. Now, if you look to modern times, the script highlights several overlooked moments in the U.S. history, such as the Treaty of Guadalupe Hidalgo, World War II Latino service, and the Mexican repatriations. From your perspective, with hidden Hispanic heritage, what are some of these critical missing chapters that your work is bringing to light? And what specific resources or stories does your platform offer to educate those on these?
So I think from the very beginning, the Spanish have had an influence on American life and culture. After all, we every fall celebrate the voyages of Christopher Columbus. Well, at least some of us still celebrate the voyages of Christopher Columbus. Others have just decided that he was an imperialist and a racist of the very worst order. And certainly what happened to the Caribbean islands that he attempted to colonize demonstrate that he wasn't the most humane of people or of explorers in general. But the Spanish exploration of what was then known as the New World cannot be denied. I think it's a misconception that the British, and maybe a little credit is given to the French, were the first and the foremost, and to some, the only people who colonized North America. That is certainly not true. The Spanish were here before, settling the Southwest and the West Coast and Florida on the East Coast and much of the Caribbean. So without a doubt, they've had an influence on what developed into the United States of America from the very beginning. And they often do not get credit for that. Their time here has always been fraught with tension. Tension between the Northern European powers, namely Great Britain, that felt that they should dominate what happened in the entire Western Hemisphere, not just the United States, but certainly in the entire Western Hemisphere. And very early on in the creation of the country, they put paper to pen to say that we will not allow other intervention in this Western Hemisphere to gain power over us. The Spanish were included in that, but it did not deter them. They stayed here, and certainly all of us who are living today know that you cannot go more than a few blocks in any city without seeing a restaurant that has its roots of their menu rooted in Spanish culture. So Spain has been with us. They fought mightily in those early days. The tension between Great Britain and Spain is well documented. So I would imagine that the Spanish had a number of reasons. First of all, Europe knew that there were riches to be found in what was called the New World. So all European countries that had any kind of sea power attempted to establish colonies here, Spain included, and probably Spain, next to Great Britain, the European country that sort of had most land at one particular point. And again, not just on the West Coast, but the East Coast as well. So their influence was here from 1492, or some historians would say pre-1492, certainly up until the present. Do we acknowledge the richness of Spanish culture in the United States the way that we should? Do we give them credit for helping to develop and to so-called civilize what became the United States of America? No, we don't. We primarily think of Bunker Hill and the British. We don't remember St. Augustine and the Spanish. And I'll stop there.
There are a series of historical events that reflect the participation of the Spain and Latin America in the history of the United States, specifically in the War of Independence, because my colleague here mentioned the rivalry between England and Spain through France, because of a pact between France and Spain. They decided to join together against England, and when the American of Independence, the War of Independence started, they decided to help the Americans. And they not only helped by attacking England and declaring war on England and diverting forces from the United States to other areas in Europe and in Latin America. They also help with weapons that they will smuggle into this country. They did it by using Spanish forces and confronting the English in the area of the Mississippi and also in the area of North Florida and the Gulf area in general. There was an instance that Washington didn't have money to pay the soldiers, and the people in Havana, Cuba, collected money to send to Washington, which they did, and they smuggled the money in a French or Portuguese vessel. I don't remember exactly which it is, but the money was delivered to Washington in Virginia. So Mexico also helped collecting money and weapons to send to the United States and help the War of Independence. Those are events that only the bookworms won't know about it, because they are not taught in schools. They are not popular. They are renegated to history. They talk about the French because they cannot avoid talking about the French. But together with the French, the Spaniards also participated in the War of Independence. In terms of the other events that were mentioned, it is a sad situation with the supposedly the American-Mexican War, because in order to settle that war, Mexico not only had to cede 50% of their territory to the United States, they also have to impose, they also have to accept certain conditions in terms of restriction in their industrial development, which have caused a fallback on their development in general, and is still paying for the consequences of that today. There is a lot of work to do in this area. There is much more that we could.
And I agree, and I think we have to remember, just as Anglo-Americans basically control what happens to the United States of America. From the very founding of this country, actually before this country was founded, it was thought by those Northern European nations that this was their territory. It didn't matter that they found indigenous people who were already here. And we all know the story about what Columbus did to the island of Hispaniola, that within a year after their settlement, there were very few indigenous people left. And when they fought the Revolutionary War, the War for Independence, their focus was on independence or freedom for paler-skinned Europeans, not for the rest of us. The Revolutionary War did not free slaves. The Revolutionary War leaders and statesmen did not appoint people who were of Southern European or other alternate hemisphere people to positions of power. And I'm not just talking about government positions, but in many cases they were not allowed to own businesses. They were not given the right to vote. They were not given full participatory rights in governing or living in this newly created Western Hemisphere, because the British and the Germans and the Swedes and the Dutch thought that this was a land that should exclusively be ruled and controlled by Northern Europeans. Remember the Monroe Doctrine.
Well, the Renaissance, I think, gave the Europeans a perception that the world belonged to them, because the same way they conquer the Americas, they also conquer Africa. Actually, they started conquering Africa before getting to America.
It's very true. Dominance and greed helped them to help this country to become, I'm not sure if it's still felt as being the number one country in the world, probably so. But we all have to remember that what's past is prologue. That what happened 250 years ago, even before 250 years ago, has a profound impact on the way we live today. And the world is not exclusively run by the United States, but all one need do is listen to the news every night, and you know that there is a United States perspective and intervention on worldwide events. I don't know of any continent where we are excluded. I'm not saying all this with dislike or disdain, total disdain anyway, for my country. This is where I was born. This is where my parents were born. One can only guess how they got here. But we have to understand that it has been the impact of the way we organized ourselves as a country, the way we fought to become the dominating power in the world 100, 200, almost 300 years ago, that has determined the state that we are in now, not just as a country, but as the world.
Let's zoom in on its direct military impact, particularly its crucial efforts that indirectly aided the American struggle in the Northeast. Bernardo de Galvez, the Spanish governor of Louisiana, was a significant advocate for American independence. His leadership was vital in drawing British forces away from the primary battlefields of the American Revolution. He led successful military campaigns that expelled British troops from Gulf Coast and Mississippi Valley, recapturing key locations like Baton Rouge, Mobile, and Pensacola. This support from Spain, called the Hispanic flank, significantly stretched British military resources. Imagine the British having to defend against the Americans in the east and simultaneously fight a powerful Spanish force in the west and south. This division of resources made victory more attainable for the American colonies. Beyond military victories, Spain also provided substantial financial aid and covert shipments of artillery to the American revolutionaries. Crucially, Spain's control of New Orleans was a vital supply line, allowing goods and resources to reach American forces, particularly those in the Western territories.
Despite crucial contributions from Galvez, Spain's role in the American Revolution and broader Hispanic history in the U.S. has often been excluded from mainstream narratives. This isn't just about the revolution. This erasure extends to significant events throughout later U.S. history. Modern reports indicate that Latino contributions are still largely missing from national institutions and school curricula. For example, a 2023 Time Op noted that Latinos, who comprise nearly 20% of the U.S. population, are starkly underrepresented in national museums, like the proposed Smithsonian Latino Museum. A Unidos U.S. policy report found that only 13% of essential Latino topics are mentioned in U.S. curricula, often reduced to footnotes. Let's look at a few key post-revolutionary moments that have been largely overlooked. The Treaty of Guadalupe Hidalgo. This treaty ended the Mexican-American War, ceding 50% of Mexico's land to the U.S. Crucially, civil rights promises made to Mexicans in these annexed territories were largely unfulfilled. World War II Latino service. Over 500,000 Latinos served in the military, most of which were met with post-war discrimination, despite their illustrated patriotism, such as Medal of Honor recipient Private Joe P. Martinez. Mexican repatriations. Over 2 million Mexicans and Mexican Americans, many of them U.S. citizens, were forcefully deported during economic downturns. Some Latino civil rights movements include key events like Mendes versus Westminster, a pre-Brown versus Board case on school desegregation, the Bracero program, which brought millions of Mexican workers, and the 1968 East LA walkouts, where some 20,000 Chicano students protested educational discrimination, igniting modern bilingual and Chicano studies initiatives. This pattern of invisibility, influenced by factors like Anglocentrism and institutional neglect, suggests it's a recurring pattern rather than being purely accidental. So, why is it so important to correct these historical oversights today? It goes beyond mere historical accuracy. As Miguel Perez and others argue, advocating for comprehensive inclusion displays the active presence of Hispanic Americans at every stage of U.S. history, from its founding to its defense and reform. This visibility in history fosters self-worth among Latino youth and cultivates a shared sense of ownership in the American identity. When young people see themselves reflected in historical narrative, it builds a vital sense of belonging and empowerment. Furthermore, inclusive history serves as a powerful tool to combat contemporary bigotry and systemic inequality. Understanding our shared past, with all its diverse contributions, can help bridge divides and foster a more just society. The good news is that major institutions are actively working to correct these historical omissions, especially as we approach the 250th anniversary of the American Revolution in 2026. The Museum of the American Revolution, Queen Sofia, Spanish Institute, and the DAR are collaborating, developing educational material like bilingual apps and expanding genealogical resources for Spanish patriots.
Unfortunately, the only language people in the United States seem to understand is a physical demonstration for change. Unfortunately, we're not at the point where we can sit down at a round table and talk these things out. We're not at the point where people truly have internalized the concept that all men and women were created equal. It took the American Revolution to achieve a degree of freedom for some people. It took the Civil War for the United States to come to the conclusion that they should at least play on getting freedom to people who were enslaved. It took World War I and World War II, because both of those movements were preceded by activity by the Ku Klux Klan, Jim Crow laws, et cetera, et cetera. And it took the prosperity that the country experienced after those wars to think about granting a better degree of citizenship to those in society who were historically maligned. It took the civil rights movement, people first marching in the streets and then rioting in the streets, to get the 1964 Civil Rights Law passed, a law that the present administration is systemically trying to change or take back again. So I don't like saying this, because I'd like to think that we were better educated and more civilized at this point, but it's going to take hardcore action. And by action, probably some sort of physical demonstration. I'm not advocating rioting, but it seems to be the only language that the powers that be seem to listen to. When we get fed up enough with our rights being taken away one by one, we will take to the streets, pretty much as we did on No King's Day. And we will end with the killing of George Floyd, which saw a record number of people protesting. It's going to take something like that for this whole attack on civil rights, because that's what it is. It's an attack on civil rights. This country is wealthy enough to support every single person that is here. No one should be going hungry. No one should have to go without health care. No one should have to be living in the streets. All that is totally unnecessary were it not for the greed of those who want to get more. Probably feared off the subject a little bit, but as you can see, I believe in this strongly. We are all deserving, totally deserving of a good quality of life, and this country is rich enough to be able to provide that if we could only get minds straight.
Following on what you're saying, what comes to mind is Cesar Chavez and United Farm Workers that it had a tremendous impact in the whole country, thanks to a very strong labor movement that supported them. And I know people that even today are reluctant to eat grapes because of the famous boycott. Yes, I think that action is necessary many times to achieve change. In terms of the inclusion of people that have been excluded from the history, the official history, I think that progress has been achieved, very little, and this is an example of it because there is a level of awareness that is growing. But, for example, the ultimately very necessary Latino Museum in Washington, in the Smithsonian, might be in danger now. We collectively, not only the Latino population, Hispanic population, but the general public that has a concern about the veracity of the history of the country, should get involved and should be aware of it at a local level, should demand a curriculum that teaches this to children at a young age as part of the regular American history, not as something esoteric and on the sideline.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. This is all American history.
It is.
Each one of our stories are part of American history. But our textbooks, our museums have all been run by Anglo-Americans, and that's where the focus has been. And we don't hear about the magnificent contributions of people of Spanish descent, people of African descent, people of Indian descent. And we were on our way to making some headway in including these populations, but they're threatening states. And we've got to keep up the pressure to make sure that we don't lose all the ground that we had gained.
The history has to be preserved and has to be shared. It's important to share the history, even if it's word of mouth, if it's necessary, but it has to be shared.
We covered a lot of ground today, from Spain's extensive pre-revolutionary presence across the Americas to its crucial military and financial support during the American Revolution. We also explored the unfortunate pattern of historical erasure that has minimized these contributions, extending even into modern school curricula and national institutions. But critically, we've also seen the powerful efforts underway to learn from history and ensure a more inclusive narrative. This journey isn't just about uncovering facts. It's about understanding how history shapes our present and our future. When we embrace a truly comprehensive history, we empower all Americans, especially young people, to see their place in the ongoing story of this nation. So by recognizing Spain's role and the broader Hispanic heritage of the US, we're not rewriting history, we're simply completing it. We're building a more accurate, inclusive, and ultimately stronger understanding of what it means to be American. So with the 250th anniversary of the American Revolution approaching in 2026, there's a renewed focus on comprehensive inclusion. So what are your hopes for how the Hidden Hispanic Heritage platform and the broader movement you represent can ensure that the momentum generated by this anniversary leads to lasting change in how American history is both taught and understood, making sure that these stories are completed rather than just rewritten?